The summons came without warning. 1 minute, I was reviewing system reports. The next, I was sitting across from 2 HR representatives in a glass-walled conference room. The blinds were drawn halfway, casting stripes of light across the table like bars of a cage. Between us sat a single folder, too thin to hold 27 years of service, yet heavy enough to change everything. The director cleared his throat and slid the folder toward me. "Corinna, this concerns a violation of company policy," he said in the dry, rehearsed tone of someone reading a manual. I opened the folder and stared at the lone piece of paper inside, a printout of a taxi receipt. $14. I blinked, certain I was missing something. "This is about a cab ride?" My voice sounded foreign, fragile even to my own ears. "An unapproved expense," the director continued. "Effective immediately. Your employment is terminated." My chest tightened. 27 years of sleepless nights. Emergency calls at dawn. Weekends traded for deadlines, all reduced to 2 printed lines on thermal paper. It wasn't just the injustice. It was the humiliation of being erased so cheaply. "Welcome back. Everyone, it means so much that you're here. Tell me, where are you tuning in from today?" And as you do, take a moment to gently roll your shoulders. It's a small move that helps release hidden tension. If this story speaks to you, tap the like button and follow the channel so you won't miss what's coming next. Then, I heard a low chuckle behind me. Marcus Vance leaned casually against the doorway, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips. He was young, ambitious, the kind of man who thrived on shortcuts and politics. "Guess times really are changing," he said smoothly. "Your era has ended. Corinna?" The words landed like glass shattering across the floor. The HR staff avoided my eyes, shuffling papers as if they hadn't heard him. But I had. I saw more than arrogance in his grin. I saw ownership. This wasn't an HR decision. It was Marcus's design. The perfect excuse crafted to strip me of my place and slide himself into the spotlight. A wave of heat rose in my face, anger pushing against humiliation. For a fleeting second, I considered defending myself, shouting the absurdity of it all. But I stayed silent. Silence carried farther than protest in a room like this. As I closed the folder, one truth crystallized. The $14 receipt was never the reason. It was the weapon, and Marcus Vance had been the one to load it. The bitterness didn't hit me all at once. It seeped in slowly, the way rain worms its way through cracks in old brick, leaving stains long after the storm passes. Sitting in my apartment later that evening, the silence felt heavier than usual. I found myself replaying the decades that had just been erased with a single sentence tossed out in a sterile conference room. 27 years. The number itself sounded almost unreal when I whispered it aloud. I had given them 27 years of my life, and they had discarded it in less than 27 seconds. Memories rose unbidden, sharper than I wanted them to be. I remembered the first winter storm I worked through, when the servers threatened to collapse under the weight of rolling power outages. The young analysts had panicked, their voices frantic. But I stayed the night with a flashlight clenched between my teeth, soldering wires by hand until dawn. My fingers were blistered, my jaw sore. But the system survived. That patch job kept the entire East Coast branch online. No one wrote about it in the papers. Of course. But within the company, it was whispered about like a miracle. Then there were the weekends I had traded for deadlines, the piano recitals I had missed, where my daughter scanned the crowd and found only her father waving from the back. The anniversaries I cut short with a phone call and a promise to make it up later. The family dinners that turned cold on the table while I sat alone in a data center, waiting for alarms to clear. I had told myself it was worth it, because what I was building mattered. I wasn't just patching circuits or repairing crashes. I was laying the foundation for the company's future, brick by digital brick. But now, all of it had been reduced to a joke, a $14 taxi ride home. After security escorted me out with nothing more than a folder and a forced smile, as if to rub salt in the wound. Marcus Vance made sure his voice carried through the hallways in the days after my dismissal. I didn't need to be there. Word traveled quickly. He told the younger engineers, "No one is irreplaceable. Not her, not me, not you." His words were smug, heavy with the hollow bravado of someone who thought authority made him competent. He strutted like a man who believed a signature on paper made him a builder. The bitterness burned hotter. Marcus hadn't been there during the midnight failures, hadn't held his breath while an entire nation's data teetered on the brink. He hadn't sacrificed years of his youth to keep fragile systems alive. Yet he was the one declaring I was disposable. That night, as I scrolled through messages, a small notification blinked. It was from one of the junior engineers I had mentored. "He says no one is irreplaceable," the message read, "but we all know only you can run the core system. Without you, it falls apart." I stared at those words, still and silent. The bitterness remained. Yes, but now it was something else too. Not hollow, not wasted. It was a fuel, and I would not let it burn in vain. Doubt crept in like a shadow I couldn't shake. It didn't arrive all at once, but settled gradually, like a chill that seeps through a room no matter how tightly the windows are shut. By the third day, after my dismissal, the whispers had reached me from every corner of the building I was no longer welcome in. Friends who still risked sending me quiet messages said the atmosphere inside was electric, tense, and full of speculation. Everyone knew Gordon Halverson, the CEO, was pushing hard to finalize the $1.9 billion contract before the quarter closed. Investors were circling like hawks, their eyes trained on profit, and Gordon, always more politician than builder, was desperate to show them a trophy. He didn't care about the risks embedded in the system. He only cared about speed, signatures, and headlines, as if the appearance of power would be enough to keep it. But what gnawed at me most wasn't Gordon's recklessness. It was Marcus. Word had spread quickly that he had positioned himself as the heir to everything I had spent years shaping. He had told Gordon directly, "I'll take over whatever Blake was handling. Consider it done." The arrogance in those words, relayed to me through a sympathetic colleague, rattled me more than I wanted to admit. Marcus didn't understand the architecture beneath the shiny dashboards. He didn't know the language buried in thousands of lines of code that only I had written, the trapdoors and safeguards hidden in the fine print. And yet, somehow, Gordon was willing to believe him, to trust a facade of confidence over the quiet certainty of expertise. Suspicion tugged at me harder each hour. Something wasn't adding up. If Gordon was racing to sign the deal, and Marcus was claiming he could step into my shoes, how could they bypass the very safeguards I had personally embedded? Every time I tried to dismiss the question, it came back sharper, heavier. I knew my systems. I knew my contracts. There shouldn't have been a way forward without me. Late that night, in the dim glow of my apartment lamp, I opened my old laptop. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee, and the hum of the city beyond my window felt distant, like another life. Years of saved archives blinked across the screen, a silent roll call of projects, notes, and signatures, reminders of how meticulously I had documented every protocol. I began to search through recent internal communications, scraps I still had access to, fragments left behind like breadcrumbs. My fingers moved faster as each file opened, a mixture of dread and anticipation tightening my breath. And then I found it. An internal memo circulated between legal and executive staff just days before my dismissal. The subject line was bland, corporate, almost forgettable, but the body of the message stopped me cold. Final execution of contract contingent upon signature of Chief Systems Architect, Corinna Blake. My name, written in black and white, a condition buried deep in the contract, legally binding, impossible to erase without triggering a cascade of compliance violations. Without my approval, the $1.9 billion agreement couldn't move forward. They had known this when they fired me. They had gambled anyway. The tension in my chest deepened into something sharp. Gordon's rush now made sense. He was betting that Marcus could bluff through the requirement, or that legal could be bullied into overlooking it. But that was impossible. I had made sure of it when drafting the compliance framework years ago. Layer by layer, like armor no one else could lift. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the glowing screen, hearing the soft thud of my own heartbeat. Every instinct told me I was standing on a fault line, the ground ready to break. They thought I had been erased, but the truth was the opposite. I was the hinge on which their billion-dollar empire now swung, and as suspicion hardened into certainty, one thought repeated in my mind like a quiet drumbeat. Marcus had promised Gordon too much, and soon, both of them would discover just how costly that lie would be. The silence of my apartment was heavier than the conference room had been. At least in that glass cage. There were voices, movement, the faint shuffle of papers. Here, there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the pipes in the walls. I sat on the couch with the lights off, staring at a stack of folders I had carried home in a cardboard box. 27 years of my life reduced to paper and dust. Loneliness has a way of magnifying everything. I saw the piano recital I missed when my daughter was 10. The empty chair at my parents' anniversary dinner. The vacations I promised, but never took. Each memory carried the same refrain. The system couldn't wait. The company needed me. I used to believe those sacrifices meant something. But now, sitting alone in a dark apartment, it felt like I had bartered away the best pieces of my life for a loyalty that was never returned. The phone rang, breaking the silence. A friend from my early days at the company spoke with the kind of cautious sympathy people use when they don't want to reopen wounds. "Corinna, don't fight this," she urged. "Gordon and Marcus, they have power. They'll crush you if you try. Sometimes you just have to walk away." Her words hurt more than she knew. It wasn't just the dismissal I was grieving. It was the realization that even those who once fought beside me believed resistance was hopeless. I hung up politely, thanked her for calling, then stared again at the boxes stacked by the door. One folder slipped open, spilling a thin stack of documents onto the floor. I bent to gather them, my fingers brushing across a seal I hadn't thought about in years. It was the official filing for a series of intellectual property registrations, software protocols, architectural designs, integration frameworks, and at the bottom of each page, in plain type, was my name. Not Gordon's, not Marcus's, mine. For a moment, I thought I was mistaken, that maybe these had long since been transferred or nullified. But the dates were clear, the filings complete, the ownership unchallenged. I had protected these systems early, almost instinctively, back when no one else thought to treat them as assets. I hadn't even remembered the precaution until now. A strange mix of emotions surged through me. The loneliness remained, but it was tempered by something sturdier, proof that I wasn't as powerless as Gordon and Marcus wanted me to believe. The company might have stripped my title and pushed me out the door, but in a quiet, legal sense. I still held the core of what they depended on. The silence of the apartment didn't feel quite as suffocating then. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to breathe a little deeper. They thought they had erased me, but here, in black ink and official seals, was undeniable evidence. I was still written into the very foundation they needed most. What do you think happens next? Will Corinna finally explode and take back control? Or will Marcus try to strike first? Drop your guess in the comments, and stay with me until the end of this story. The twist might surprise you. The warehouse smelled of dust and machine oil, a far cry from the polished glass towers I had spent most of my career inside. Yet it was here, in this forgotten space, borrowed from a friend of a friend, that I found the people who still reminded me of why I had once loved the work. A handful of young engineers, faces lit only by laptop screens and cheap overhead bulbs, looked up as I walked in. They had been the first to feel the cut of Marcus's ambition, Smart, eager, willing to stay late. They had been told their jobs were redundant. In truth, Marcus didn't want anyone around who might question his authority. He wanted obedience, not talent. I hesitated at the doorway, suddenly aware of how heavy 27 years looked compared to their youth. But then one of them, a wiry programmer named Seth, broke the silence. "We didn't think you'd actually come." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But if anyone here understands what it feels like to be erased, it's you." The group exchanged uncertain glances. Hope flickered in their eyes. But it was guarded. They had seen what happened to me, and none of them wanted to be next. I laid the folders I carried onto a makeshift table, the same boxes I had unpacked in my apartment days earlier. "You all know what Gordon and Marcus are chasing. A $1.9 billion deal that depends on a system you helped build. Without us, it collapses. That's not arrogance. That's fact." A young woman named Lila folded her arms, her voice sharp with doubt. "And what are you suggesting? That we fight back? If you partner with a rival, doesn't that make you just like Marcus, using power plays? Only for your own gain?" Her words stung because they carried the fear everyone else was too polite to voice. For a moment, the silence was thick, and I felt the fragile thread holding me here start to fray. I had come searching for solidarity, but all I saw in their eyes was suspicion. I drew a deep breath, sliding one document free from the pile. My hands trembled as I laid it flat on the table, the embossed seal catching the light. "This isn't about becoming another Marcus," I said softly. "This is about survival, and more than that, it's about truth." They leaned closer, across the page. Bold letters confirmed what I had nearly forgotten until a few nights ago. The intellectual property filings, the legal ownership of the architecture, all under my name. Gasps rippled through the group. Seth whispered, "Wait, it means Gordon and Marcus don't own what they think they own." I interrupted gently. "They built their empire on my work, and the law recognizes that, whether they admit it or not." Lila's arms fell to her sides, her skepticism faltering. Her eyes searched mine, as if trying to measure whether I was telling the truth or offering them another illusion. I held her gaze, steady, unflinching. "I'm not here to drag you into revenge," I continued. "I'm here because the system we built deserves better than to be sold off like a cheap trinket. You've all poured yourselves into this work, and if we walk away now, Marcus wins, and you'll carry the scars of being disposable for the rest of your careers." The room was quiet again, but this silence was different. The doubt had not disappeared, but it had shifted. In its place was a cautious spark, fragile but real. They didn't cheer or clap or rush to pledge themselves. They simply looked at one another, then back at me, with the unspoken acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't finished. For the first time since the folder slid across the HR table, I felt a flicker of hope that wasn't mine alone. It was small, uncertain, but it was shared. And in that moment, it was enough to keep me standing. The air in the warehouse was thick with a strange mix of exhaustion and adrenaline. We had been there for hours, scrawling diagrams on whiteboards salvaged from storage, passing laptops back and forth, mapping out what we called the parallel contract. It wasn't just a plan, it was survival. If Gordon and Marcus wanted to sign away a $1.9 billion deal without the people who built the system, we would create an alternative path, one that recognized the true architects. But as determination grew in the room, so did the risks. On the third night, Seth rushed in with his phone in hand, his face pale. "You need to see this," he said. He turned the screen toward me. A company-wide memo, stamped with Gordon's name, was spreading like wildfire. It accused me of stealing confidential documents and attempting to sell them to competitors. My name, in bold letters, branded as a thief. I felt the shock slam into me, hollowing my chest. 27 years of loyalty, twisted in a single sentence. My throat tightened. My hands numb as I read the words again and again. Unauthorized possession of proprietary materials. Breach of fiduciary duty. Potential litigation. Lila cursed under her breath. They're painting you as Marcus's opposite, someone who'd burn the company just for revenge. I lowered the phone slowly. The sting of betrayal fresh all over again. He's covering his tracks, I murmured. If this contract collapses, Gordon needs someone to blame. And Marcus needs me ruined, so no one believes I ever mattered. The room fell silent. Doubt flickered in their eyes, not directed at me, but at the enormity of what we faced. If the accusation stuck, no investor would touch us. No partner would risk their name alongside mine. For a long moment, the weight of it pressed down on me. The determination I had clung to felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. Had I led these young engineers into a dead end? Was I proving Gordon and Marcus right? That I had nothing left but bitterness? Then Seth broke the silence. That memo isn't proof. It's fear. They wouldn't spread lies this loud unless they were worried. His voice trembled. But the conviction steadied me more than he knew. I looked at the whiteboard, the diagrams we had drawn, the fragile beginnings of something new. Marcus's lie burned like acid, but it also revealed a truth. They knew we had the power to stop them. Still, the question remained, how could we possibly keep going without outside support? That answer arrived in the most unexpected form. My phone buzzed again, this time with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another echo of the smear campaign. But when I answered, a calm, measured voice greeted me. Corinna Blake, this is Daniel Rhodes. We worked together years ago on the Meridian rollout. I remembered him instantly, a cautious but fair investor who had once pushed for ethical safeguards when everyone else wanted speed. He had left the company after a bitter clash with Gordon. I've been following the news, Rhodes said. They're trying to bury you, but I know better. I know whose hands kept that company alive. If you're building something new, I want in. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Shock rippled through me again. But this time, it wasn't hollow. It was electric. After days of being smeared as a thief, hearing someone not only believe in me, but offer support felt like a lifeline thrown across a storm. The young engineers watched as I lowered the phone, their eyes wide with the same disbelief I felt. He wants to help us, I whispered. He believes in us. The bitterness of Marcus's lie still burned, but it no longer consumed me. Determination surged back, sharper than before. If they wanted to call me a thief, fine, let them shout. Because now, I had allies, proof of ownership, and the one thing Marcus and Gordon could never fake: trust. News of the celebration reached me before the invitations ever could. Gordon Halverson and Marcus Vance had rented out the top floor of the Avalon Hotel, a glittering hall of glass and chandeliers, to toast what they called the future of Halverson Dynamics. Photographs spilled across the business pages, crystal glasses raised, polished smiles. Marcus standing just half a step behind Gordon like a prince in waiting. I stared at the images on my laptop. My jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Anger roared in my chest, begging to be unleashed. But I pressed it down, forced it into silence. Rage was exactly what they wanted. Proof of the bitter, irrelevant woman they were painting me to be. If I shouted now, I would be giving them the story they had scripted. Instead, I clicked through the glossy photos until one detail caught my eye. At the edge of the stage, framed between two waiters, stood a cluster of reporters. One of them I recognized, Emily Kerr, a journalist known for asking the questions no one wanted answered. That evening, my phone buzzed with her number. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity overcame the dread. Corinna, she said without preamble, I've reviewed all the public filings related to this contract. Your name is absent from every one of them. Can you explain why the company's chief systems architect isn't listed anywhere? Her words sliced through me, reopening wounds I thought had begun to scar. They had erased me, not only from the payroll, but from history itself. Anger threatened to spill over, but I caught my breath and steadied it. I can't give you the story you want," I said carefully. "Not yet. But I can give you proof that the story they're telling isn't complete." I ended the call before my emotions betrayed me. Then I reached for the folder that had become both anchor and weapon. Inside was the contract draft I had uncovered, a pristine document missing one crucial element, my signature. Without it, the deal was legally inert. They could toast all they wanted, but it would collapse in silence the moment lawyers took a closer look. I scanned the page, attached it to an encrypted email, and typed a single line to Emily. "Look at what's not there." When I hit send, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Satisfaction flickered for a moment. Finally, a crack in the wall they had built around me. But beneath it, the anger still pulsed, heavy and unresolved. I wanted to storm into that ballroom, hold the contract over Gordon's smug smile, and watch Marcus's confidence crumble in front of the cameras. I wanted the humiliation I felt returned to them tenfold, but that wasn't my role anymore. My fight wasn't in champagne halls or staged photographs. My fight was in silence, in evidence, in letting the truth undo them at its own pace. Hours later, photos from the party flooded social media. Marcus clinking glasses, Gordon proclaiming a new era, investors nodding approvingly. I studied each image, my anger simmering under the surface, my fists clenched in the dim glow of my apartment. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they had erased me. But the proof was already moving, quietly and invisibly, toward the hands of someone who would ask the questions they couldn't silence. For now, I swallowed the anger and sat in the dark. Let them laugh. Let them drink. Let them pretend. The toast would curdle soon enough. And when it did, the missing line on that contract, the absence of my signature, would be louder than any accusation I could ever make. The conference room at the Avalon Tower was designed for intimidation. Walls of glass framed the skyline, and a long mahogany table stretched so far it seemed to split the city below in half. Around it sat investors in tailored suits, attorneys with files stacked neatly before them, and Gordon Halverson at the head, his smile sharp and rehearsed. At his right hand sat Marcus Vance, posture straight, expression smug, as if he had already inherited the empire. I wasn't there in person, but transcripts and whispers travel faster than the people who try to contain them. That morning, as the meeting began, the tension inside the room was palpable, billions of dollars balanced on the stroke of a pen. The lead attorney, a meticulous man named Porter, began reviewing the final paperwork. His voice was steady as he flipped page after page, but the rhythm faltered when he reached the final section. His brow furrowed. Silence stretched across the room. "Where?" Porter asked, tapping the paper with his finger. "Is the technical architect's signature?" The words dropped like a stone in water. The room rippled with unease. Gordon shifted in his seat, his smile stiffening. "That signature is unnecessary," he said quickly. "Our former employee is no longer with us." But Porter didn't look convinced. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the contract again. Clause 14.2. Execution contingent upon certification by Chief Systems Architect. Without it, the contract is unenforceable. Marcus pushed back his chair and rose smoothly to his feet. "That role is mine now," he declared with confidence. "I've replaced her. You have my signature instead." There was a murmur of discomfort among the attorneys. Porter didn't even blink. He simply closed the folder in front of him with deliberate care. Then, in the stillness, he spoke the words that froze the entire table. "No, Mr. Vance, you cannot replace the designer of record. The clause is explicit. The agreement requires the original architect's certification. Without Ms. Blake's signature, this contract is void. The tension broke into chaos. Investors leaned forward, voices sharp with panic. Void! What do you mean, void? One demanded. Another slammed his hand on the table. Gordon snapped. That can't be right. Surely there's an exception. His voice cracked on the word exception. Porter remained calm. The only anchor in the storm. No exception. The language is airtight. You may have dismissed her. But legally, she remains the sole authority. This deal cannot move forward. All eyes turned to Marcus, who was still standing. The smug confidence that had carried him for weeks faltered as color drained from his face. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. Gordon's voice rose, sharper, desperate. We've already announced this to the market. The press is waiting downstairs. Do you have any idea what this will do to us? Porter's answer was a scalpel. Yes, it will dismantle you, unless you secure her certification. This entire $1.9 billion arrangement is legally worthless. The room dissolved into shouting, phones buzzing, papers shuffling, investors whispering furiously to their aides. Outside the glass walls, cameras flashed as reporters tried to capture the moment through the tinted glass. I could almost feel the panic from miles away. While they scrambled, I sat quietly at my kitchen table. The original filings spread before me. My name, written years ago into the framework of the system, was the one detail Gordon and Marcus had underestimated. They thought I could be erased with a taxi receipt. They thought Marcus could bluff his way into my role. But the tension in that boardroom was proof that they were wrong. As the shouting escalated, Porter's voice cut through once more, calm and implacable. Gentlemen, the law doesn't bend for convenience. Find Ms. Blake, or walk away empty-handed. And in that instant, the empire Gordon and Marcus had tried to build on arrogance and shortcuts began to crack. The morning after the failed signing, the financial networks lit up like wildfire. Headlines screamed across every channel. Halverson deal collapses at the table. Reporters outside the Avalon Tower shouted questions into the wind as black cars pulled away, carrying investors with faces ashen and lips pressed into thin lines. Within the first hour of trading, the company's stock plummeted 12%. By noon, it had dropped nearly 20%. Billions of dollars in market value evaporated before lunch. Inside the tower, panic was no longer concealed behind polished smiles. Assistants sprinted through corridors, phones glued to their ears. Investor relations scrambled to craft statements that sounded like reassurance, but read like desperation. In the executive suite, the shouting could be heard from the elevators. Marcus Vance was the loudest voice. "This is HR's fault," he barked, slamming a folder onto the table. They should never have let her near proprietary documents in the first place. They bungled the termination process, and now we're paying the price. But Gordon Halverson was in no mood for scapegoats. His face, usually composed for cameras, was flushed red with fury. He jabbed a finger at Marcus. "Don't you dare pin this on HR. You told me you could step into her role. You told me you could sign in her place. Do you remember those words?" Marcus blanched, but tried to recover, his voice rising higher. "I didn't know the clause was ironclad. Legal should have flagged it. You can't expect me to." "I expect you to do your job," Gordon roared, cutting him off. Papers scattered as his fist hit the table. The room fell into stunned silence. The only sound the relentless buzz of incoming calls vibrating on every phone. Meanwhile, investors were already circling with lawsuits. Some claimed they had been misled by public statements that promised a deal days away from execution. Others hinted at withdrawing permanently, whispering that the company had lost credibility in every major market. And then came the spark that turned chaos into an inferno. A video appeared online, uploaded anonymously, but spreading across every platform within minutes. It showed Marcus in a private conversation, smirking with a glass of whiskey in hand. His words were cruel, mocking, the arrogance unmistakable. Corinna Blake? She was deadweight, replaceable, irrelevant. I made sure she was out before she dragged us down. A $14 cab ride. Can you believe that's all it took to erase her? The clip was short, but it was lethal. Employees who had once stayed quiet flooded message boards with outrage. Former colleagues shared stories of Corinna's sacrifices, nights she had saved systems, days she had gone without rest. Hashtags erupted, painting Marcus not as a leader, but as a symbol of betrayal and greed. News anchors replayed the clip on loop, contrasting it with the company's collapsing stock ticker in the corner of the screen. Commentators called it the most tone-deaf display of arrogance in corporate memory. Within hours, Gordon was being asked publicly why such a man had been trusted with authority. Back in the tower, Marcus tried to defend himself. "It was taken out of context," he insisted, sweat beading at his temple. "Someone doctored that clip. This is sabotage." But Gordon's patience had reached its limit. He leaned across the table, voice low but seething. "No one needed to doctor anything. You've humiliated us in front of the entire market. You told me you could replace her, and now the world sees you as a fool." For the first time, Marcus had no reply. He sat back in his chair, pale and trembling. As the storm raged on screens all around him, the company was unraveling, thread by thread. Investors demanded Gordon's resignation. Employees whispered about jumping ship. Customers began to question whether the technology they had trusted was as secure as they had been led to believe. And through it all, the image of Marcus laughing over a woman's erasure, over a $14 taxi receipt, was everywhere. I watched the chaos unfold from a distance, my phone buzzing with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were apologies. Others were simply acknowledgments. "You were right." The irony wasn't lost on me. They had fired me to make the company stronger, to silence my questions. Now, their empire was collapsing not because of my absence, but because of their arrogance. The chaos wasn't mine to control. It was theirs to endure. And it was only just beginning. The warehouse no longer smelled like dust and abandonment. By the end of the week, it smelled like sold air, ink from whiteboard markers, and the faint sweetness of coffee brewing in cheap machines lined up on a folding table. We had turned the forgotten space into something that resembled a lab. Though our desks were old doors propped on sawhorses, and our server racks were borrowed from scrapyards. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. For the first time in months, maybe years. I felt that same pulse of energy I had known when I was just beginning in this field. The sense that creation mattered more than politics, that we could build something stronger than arrogance could ever destroy. The young engineers threw themselves into the work. Seth pieced together new frameworks, Lila drafted protocols, and others scavenged for parts or coded deep into the night. The warehouse echoed with laughter, groans of frustration, the clicking of keyboards, and the hum of machines. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Still, shadows lingered. One evening, as we gathered around a table strewn with diagrams, a nervous silence settled. A junior engineer named Dylan finally voiced what everyone had been avoiding. "What if Marcus sues us?" His voice cracked with the weight of the thought. "They're already calling you a thief in the press. What's to stop them from dragging us into court? We don't have the money to fight them." The words hung heavy in the air. Doubt spread across the room like smoke. I saw it in their eyes. The fear that all of this, our fragile beginning, could be crushed by a single lawsuit before it had a chance to bloom. I understood their fear because it was mine, too. For days, I had carried the same question in the quiet hours after midnight, wondering if I had been reckless to pull them into this fight. The anger I once felt had transformed into determination. But determination alone doesn't pay legal fees or shield a team from corporate retaliation. I rose from my chair. Walking to the box of documents I kept guarded like treasure. My fingers brushed over the worn edges until I pulled out a folder marked with the government seal. I carried it back to the table and laid it flat in front of them. This, I said, flipping it open, is why they can't touch us. Inside were copies of filings, intellectual property registrations, patents, compliance frameworks, all stamped and dated. Each one carried my name. Not Halverson Dynamics, not Gordon Halverson, not Marcus Vance, mine. The group leaned in, scanning the pages with wide eyes. Dylan's lips parted in disbelief. Lila traced her finger along the embossed seal. Seth whispered, "You registered all of this yourself?" "Years ago," I said quietly. "I knew what this system could become. I knew the company would try to own it outright. So I protected it. Legally, irrevocably. They may control the narrative in the press, but they do not control the law. And the law says this belongs to me, and now, to us." Relief washed across their faces, fragile at first, then growing into something stronger. The tension that had gripped the room loosened, replaced by cautious smiles. Dylan exhaled, the fear in his eyes softening into something closer to belief. "You mean," he asked, "they can't stop us from building this?" "They can try," I admitted. "But they can't erase ownership. They can't undo the fact that every core design traces back here." The mood shifted. Laughter bubbled up again. Tentative but real. Someone plugged in an old speaker, and music filled the warehouse. Low at first, then louder. We worked with new energy. As if the papers on the table had lit a fire none of us wanted to see extinguished. For me, the sense of renewal was overwhelming. I had walked out of a company that discarded me with a $14 receipt. I had sat alone in silence, drowning in humiliation. Now, surrounded by bright young minds and the proof of ownership in my hands, I felt reborn. Not as the woman they had erased, but as the architect of something greater. The warehouse wasn't just a lab. It was a beginning. The warehouse looked different that morning. Sunlight